Hola, I'm Andrea Rivera de Vega, and this is Adelante Pronto, Milwaukee PBS podcast. The Southside neighbors share more than just a location where they live in, share a sense of community. And being part of a community gives us a sense of belonging, where people work together to resolve issues that affect them through commitment and togetherness. It embraces spirit, character, image, and pride, and can make us feel as we are part of something greater. In this segment, we're talking to Brad Rutter, a community organizer who will share with us his experience working in the Southside neighborhood of Milwaukee, a predominantly Latino community. We will also discuss how working together can build a sense of dignity, restores people's sense of significance, relevance, and what they do can matter. Building community with a purpose, one neighbor at a time. Today, we're talking with Brad Rutter, community organizer at Safe and Sound. He works in the District 2 area, which is the Clark Square and Layton Boulevard West neighborhoods. Hi, Brad. Thank you for being here with us today and welcome.
Hey, Andrea. Thank you for having me.
Brad, could you share with us a little bit about you and about your background?
Yeah, so I'm Brad, and I'm currently a community organizer at Safe and Sound. Before this, I worked with the Peace Corps on a program called Healthy Schools in the Western Highlands of Guatemala for about a year and a half. And that was a really interesting experience that I got to apply previous knowledge in public health and previous knowledge in the Spanish language to really immerse myself into that culture. And while we were supposed to bring like sort of technical assistance and bring knowledge to an area, I really think that I learned more than anything. It was quite an educational experience, both from a cultural standpoint, language, and public health standpoint, just to learn about everything in a different part and region of the world. Before that, I was an undergraduate at Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where I studied political science, and I'm originally from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And currently, I'm a graduate student at the University of Milwaukee, Zilber School of Public Health as a Master of Public Health candidate.
What is your role at Safe and Sound, and what type of work do you do in the community?
Yeah, definitely. So as a community organizer, I'm one of 5. So Safe and Sound has 5 different community organizers or 5 different neighborhood teams. And so they are in Milwaukee Police Districts 2, 3, 5, and 7. And within each of those areas, there's a neighborhood team. There is a community organizer, youth organizer, and neighborhood safety coordinator. So within District 2, I am one of 3 on my work team. And as a community organizer, I focus my work primarily with adult residents, helping them form block clubs if they desire, maintaining those block clubs, visiting them, making sure that they are connected with various community-based organizations, or if they want to have someone come in and speak, making sure that their alderperson or elected official is able to attend, or just connecting them. It doesn't have to be in those block club meetings. I also help facilitate community events, whether that be cleanups, drug takebacks. We have cleanups monthly in both the Layton Boulevard West neighborhoods and the Clark Square neighborhoods. I believe that we also do more when we're in person. As we all know, the pandemic has really changed how everything has looked. Community organizing is primarily done in person, and a job that used to be probably 70 to 80% in person has gone 70 to 80% virtual, maybe even 70 to 90%, depending on the week. So we really have had to learn how to shift things into a virtual format, but also how to engage residents best. And that's really difficult to do, as a lot of people are zoomed out. I think that's what people are calling it, or just having fatigue from being connected with their technology.
You mentioned a couple of areas that you work with. Are those that initiatives and projects that you directly work with in the neighborhood?
So the cleanups, we partnered with VSCDC and Clark Square Neighborhood Initiative, and those are community-based organizations that work primarily in those neighborhoods. And those are organizations are very established in the area. And I'm sort of catching the torch from the previous community organizer, arrivado, and furthering that partnership. So that's something that we usually do, I want to say, on maybe a bi-monthly basis, but we really wanted to focus this year on doing it more on a monthly basis and having it scheduled and make sure that residents knew about it and were prepared, and we could meet them at different points in the year as well if they weren't able to come to certain ones. And it's really interesting because there's a lot of organizers that come and go within each organization and nonprofits in general. So it's really interesting to see and hear about previous organizers and the work that they've done and how I can continue that success and that excellence, but also bring a different innovative approach to it to make sure that we're continuing to meet residents with where they're at.
Absolutely. And how challenging is to engage neighbors to participate in activities and be part of that solution process?
So I think it's challenging, but also not as challenging as one might think. So you have those residents. I want to say that there's like three spectrums of residents. So you have the ones that are going to be engaged no matter what, and they'll actually seek you out because they want to see change within their neighborhoods or be engaged. And then you have the ones that absolutely want nothing to do with you, and that's well within their right. And you probably aren't going to seek them out to do anything. But then you have a large portion of people in the middle, and those are the ones that you really want to try and reach as well. You want to reach all of them, but that's maybe the largest portion of residents are those in the middle. And engaging with them can look very different. So in the past, Safe and Sound used to do front porch conversations in which they would knock on the doors and pass out information, but also learn about residents' desires and goals for their community and neighborhood, but also just have a listening ear, because I think that's often what people want, just to felt like they're heard. And certainly we hear them, but also we want to make sure that we follow through on things that they tell us. So that's one way we do it, but also we do outreach right now primarily in the form of literature drops, in which we're passing out information and leaving it on people's front porch. And previously, this is something that Safe and Sound really avoided because, as you know, when you get a bunch of mail, you're not really going to go through it. And we've really had to be meaningful about how we design our flyers and how much we give them, how little we give them, the frequency. Also, like maybe if we try and encounter people, because currently as an organization, we're not knocking on doors, but if people will see us in the community and maybe ask us from across the street, hey, who are you? What are you doing? Really being intentional about the times and amount that we go out. And then last, I would also say something that we have done in the past that I think would be very successful for this year are pop-up lots, in which we would go into certain areas and neighborhoods, maybe a busy street on a corner, and literally pop up and have different people there with resources. So this summer, that's going to be COVID-19 vaccination information, maybe getting someone there to register people to vote, having someone from a staffing agency to be there to help people get jobs. And this can look very different from district to district with each neighborhood team, but a lot of these things look similar. And I think the beauty of it all is having the organizers who learn the different neighborhoods and learn about what works and what doesn't, and being able to adjust that for each neighborhood team.
Now, Brad, the south side of Milwaukee has a high concentration, as you know, of Latino population, right? However, the community has become more diverse with other cultures also present in the area. What do you appreciate about the racial and ethnic diversity of our community, and how do neighbors work together?
Yeah, definitely. So for that first part, in terms of an increasing amount of diversity in the South Side, I think that's a really beautiful thing, because I think we have I will call it an opportunity here in the US right now. We are at maybe a fork in the road, the crossroads, where we have the opportunity to learn about different cultures and different races, ethnicities, and being able to celebrate those differences. And going into it with that mindset is going to be key. And I can't speak too much to it. I've only been in this role for about 1 year now, and it's been very virtual, but having conversations with different residents and hearing how the neighborhoods have evolved over the year, it's really exciting to hear how their residents are getting different perspectives, and some of them really celebrate that. And being able to make sure that we have that level of social cohesion and social connectedness. Ultimately, that's Safe and Sound's primary mission, is to build that social cohesion. Safe and Sound calls it collective efficacy, but making sure that neighbors are aware of who their neighbors are and making sure that they are aware. And part of that goes even further into celebrating those differences between our neighbors, but also getting to know them and just making sure that cohesion is there. I think a lot of times that doesn't exist in maybe other neighborhoods, and certain parts, certainly in the South Side, could benefit from more of it. But I think that's something that's up and coming in the South Side.
Absolutely. And how do we get the different cultural groups, the ethnic groups within the community? Do they work together? Do you work with them separately? How does that take place in this South Side?
Definitely. So I think there are a lot of opportunities, but there are also a lot of barriers. I think maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but one of the barriers in working in the South Side is I'm not Latino, I'm not Latinx, and I don't identify as Latinx, and I'm clearly an Asian American man. And understandably, people are going to be apprehensive about listening to someone that is not from their community and not in their community. So I feel fortunate that I do have a level of proficiency with Spanish, and I have lived in Guatemala in the past. So I will say that I am aware. I wouldn't say I fully understand, because I don't want to assume that I know anything about anyone's culture, but I'm aware and I can talk to my experiences a little. I can make small talk in a sense and really start to build that confianza, or that trust level within communities. So I think in terms of working with different cultural groups and different communities, I think that's something that I'm still learning myself on those best practices. And there's a large portion of, I believe, Hmong in the South Side, and also Korean populations. And I don't speak those languages other than English and Spanish. So that's a strong barrier in itself. I think we did outreach earlier this year with the Milwaukee Fire Department, and we did that in Clark Square, and I believe we're doing so in the Silver City neighborhood later this year. But one of the barriers that we had was that there were very limited Spanish speakers available to go and help us do that outreach. And I feel fortunate that I was able to assist with that. And we did ultimately be able to meet that need. But then we went to a few houses and knocked on them, and people answered it. And I didn't know which language they were speaking. And that's a shortfall on my end, and maybe something that I need to work on in the future to make sure that we're bringing someone that can speak languages commonly spoken in those neighborhoods. As you were just saying, there's a large influx of different cultural groups moving to the area, and part of celebrating the differences is making sure that you're well prepared to reach those groups. Otherwise, it's easy to feel isolated, easy to feel neglected. I think a lot of moving forward and progress within these neighborhoods are making sure that we, as community-based organizations that claim to work in these neighborhoods, are well prepared. And I do really appreciate all the work that Safe and Sound does. And I think it will be an interesting time, like as we move forward, as we're making sure that we're prepared with different materials in different languages. And I think we've made some great progress in the past few years, and this year even, making sure we're reaching these populations equitably.
Now, moving a little bit to what you like about our community, what is the thing that you most like about this community that you work with?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I really appreciate about the community that I work with, or you said work in or work with?
I said work with.
Yes, that's interesting the way you phrased that. I appreciate that. The community that I work with, there's a lot of things to appreciate, such as the cultural diversity. I think I come from northern Wisconsin in Eau Claire, and there it is, I want to say about 90% white population there. And on the south side, it's very diverse. You could go the entire like Layton Boulevard, Greenfield, or National and not see a single white person in. Not, I just want to celebrate those differences and celebrate the fact that it is a diverse area. But also, I think for myself is those, you can see the diversity there in the restaurants, in the supermarkets, in those various areas that people celebrate their culture rather than try and hide it. I think it's tough because being myself as an Asian American, it's tough knowing when, how much to show and how much to celebrate of myself. And I think another part of that, being a part of the LGBTQIA plus community or queer community, that's another thing, knowing how much to show, how much to celebrate, and how much we really want to let people in. And I think every time I've gone and had a conversation with someone in the South Side, everyone's been receptive to talking. And a lot of times you don't get that in other communities. A lot of people don't want to talk and be bothered. And hey, I fully respect that as well. But in the South Side, you'll see a lot more of representation and people willing to show who they are.
Now, flip side of the coin, what are some of your top concerns for this community that you work with?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that we see a lot of drug use in the area, and that's just one that comes to the top of my head because of the cleanups that we've done, and we've seen a lot of needles. And I think rather than look at it as a problem, looking for solutions. So how can we accommodate people in this community? How can we make sure that they are getting safe needles and disposing of them properly and making sure that they're safe ultimately? Because I think a lot of times we're looking for fingers to point at and to show blame on areas, and that's everyone just wants to help ultimately, and we see problems and solutions differently. But I think making sure that people have a safe environment to live the lifestyle that they're at, I think is really important, because if you were to ask anyone, I think that's the ultimate goal. So I don't want to be necessarily negative just with all that. So I think there's also opportunities and within the South Side. But one thing that could be a barrier is making sure that community-based organizations are providing culturally relative and also linguistically relevant information, making sure that you're providing it for that community in Spanish, I think, or providing an interpreter. And I think we're doing a great job with that. But also, that's coming from my perspective. And someone listening to this could be saying, there is that barrier still, that there still is that inequity that exists. And I would say, you know what, that is totally true, because I've never had an issue in where I've lived with finding information in my own language. And I think that the city of Milwaukee and at the federal level, we have some great programs for people to access right now, such as like CARES Act funding, the pandemic EBT funding. But what about people in the Latinx community that only speak Spanish? The people on the South Side that only speak Spanish might not have a young family member to translate that information. And I think that the city has provided the pandemic EBT information in Spanish, but making sure that we're continuing to do so. Also with the stimulus funding this year, making sure that everyone knows how to access it, such as vaccines as well, making sure that we're listening to those communities and their concerns. I think a lot of times communities of color get marginalized with medical care, and they get different treatment, and not only just telling people, hey, you should get your vaccine, which just a plug for that, really make sure to get vaccinated, but also feel free to ask me questions. Reach out to me outside this podcast if you're listening for information, but making sure that people feel heard. And going back to what I said at the beginning, and I'll probably say it again, listen to those communities, listen to what they're concerns are and address them, but in a way that's meeting them with where they're at, not just where you think they want to be met. I think one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou is, and this is paraphrasing it, but when we know better, we do better. And I think we're knowing a lot better these days. And we've made some very unfortunate mistakes in this country in the past and perhaps in the city. But I think there's opportunity to grow, and we know better now, so we can do better. And that's where the opportunity is.
In talking about opportunities, we know COVID-19 kind of hit us hard last year and we're still recovering. What strengths have been revealed or uncovered about our community, or what has made you feel proud to be part of our community during this time, these challenging times?
One of the things that I feel very fortunate within the community on the South Side is when we had for example, a drug take back event. And this primarily was someone else on my team who had a prior established connection there, but we needed a location last minute for our drug take back event. And this gentleman very graciously opened up his lot to us and stayed and talked with us. I think there's a lot of generosity in the community, and not to say it's untapped, but I think a lot of people are more willing to help than you'd expect on the South Side, willing to lend a hand when needed. But I think accessing that is difficult, and it's really hard to see during these times because I think a lot of people are drowning in their own life right now and just trying to maintain the status quo and be able to move forward and further themselves. But that's one thing that I've really appreciated over this past year. It's small things and small conversations where people have been willing to help out and are willing to learn more about me and my organization that I work for.
So, what challenges has COVID-19 revealed or uncovered about our community or our neighborhood?
That's a great question. And I don't want to speak for the community itself, but the statistics and numbers really have shown that there's a strong disparity among communities of color, especially within the Hispanic and Latinx communities, for people that have tested positive for COVID-19, but also unfortunately pass away. And you see a lot of people that know someone, are related to someone that have been affected by COVID-19, and unfortunately fatalities as well. And I think that's has really set back the community in ways in itself, because as we know, there are a lot of systemic issues that we could address. I won't go into them too in depth, but I think just having infrastructure in place to support these communities and make sure that they have proper time to be able to, for example, to grieve their loved ones and also take care of them. I think we've seen that exposed in our system with certain leave policies that it's very difficult for these families. But also on the flip side, I think you've seen a lot of these people in these communities banding together to help each other. And I would say that's a very beautiful thing, but that's a very privileged thing to be able to say that these communities are very tight-knit, and it shows because they also grieve together. They also have a lot of losses together. So it's kind of a double-edged sword because I'm seeing it from an outsider perspective that it's very beautiful that these communities are tight-knit, but on the flip side, they're tight-knit because they have to be and they rely on each other. Whereas I'm coming from a privileged outside perspective that sees the beauty of it, but doesn't have to experience it firsthand. And it's just something to realize for people that aren't in the community, that you might see things that are very great, but also what has happened in the past to cause that and what has forced that to happen. Just sort of having a broader range and having a broader perspective to look into it.
Brad, as an Asian American, do you have any stories to share about something that has affected you or influenced you in a positive or in a negative way working in the community?
Yeah, so being Asian American, and I don't know if I mentioned this previously, I am adopted, and I did grow up in a very white community. So growing up and having that sort of psychologically and community identifying, maybe like being surrounded by white people, I didn't maybe recognize that I was Asian as I was, but also in some instances, I did really recognize that I was Asian and I was an outsider. But I think this has happened in Guatemala, and it's happened here in the US. And this isn't necessarily a bad experience because I've been on the opposite end of this. I think ultimately, when I try to introduce myself and find myself into certain social groups, it's very difficult sometimes because I don't have that shared connection as a Latinx person, and nor should they be fully accepting right away. They should be apprehensive because often in other communities, there is that barrier of breaking the ice and making sure that this person is going to be someone who we want to welcome into the group, someone that we want to listen to, someone that's not going to gaslight us into talking about our community in a certain way. And I have experienced that in Guatemala. It's really tough to build that confianza and really talk with these groups. And ultimately, if you're not part of the group, it's tough to speak for them. And I believe I've probably made that mistake in the past, and it's been an interesting route to really just be there and learn, just sit and listen. And I think a lot of people need to become more comfortable with that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think a lot of people have dominated the conversation and narrative for a long time. And, you know, there's been a lot of good done, but a lot of harm as well. And just making sure that you're willing to listen to that community, but also make sure that you're taking that and moving forward with your actions, because you can sit and listen and find something really receptive, but how are you going to take that into your workplace, into your personal life? How are you going to combat the inequities and speak out against an injustice? And I know that maybe strayed far away from the initial question that you asked of what have you seen in the community, or like what have your experiences been? But I think it's ultimately to be here and learn and bring the skill set that I have from my past, not to bring harm, but to be there and listen and ask them how I can help and make sure that my skill set is being used to the best of my abilities, but in a way that the community wishes for it to be used. Within this past year, I think COVID-19 has really stressed everyone out, and seeing it being called the Chinese virus or China virus, and really having Asians associated with it has really hurt the community. But moving forward now, it's important to recognize it. So go visit maybe a Vietnamese restaurant, maybe a Chinese takeout place, and maybe talk with one of your Asian American friends. And it's tough because not everyone wants to speak to their experiences, but maybe ask them about their experiences, or just at the least let them know that you're an ally there with them, fighting against racial injustice. I think, like I said before, there's going to be a portion of people that are going to support you no matter what. There's going to be people that are against you, unfortunately. But I think the majority of people do have good intentions and are in the middle, and they're not speaking up. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people do support and are in that middle ground, but just taking it a step further and from where you're at right now. And for me, that could be being on this podcast. I don't really share my narrative too much in my perspective. But for someone else, that could just be, like I said, supporting your local Asian businesses, supporting those local BIPOC voices that historically have been oppressed.
You could give one or two action steps for our audience interested in being part of the solution and more active in their community. What would that be?
This one, I think maybe I'll have a couple. The first one, I think, is me as a public health student recognizing racism as a public health issue. It affects, as we've seen this past year, it affects people in various capacities. And I think really the systems in place have been exposed for what they are. It's benefits white people, and communities of color have been oppressed through it. So recognizing racism as a public health issue, and whether that means like calling your local health officer director to ask them to declare it as an issue for your city, for your county, but also getting involved within the community. So a lot of different cities and areas have those community-based organizations that are working within specific areas. So just do a little research, maybe 5 minutes on Google, and you'll find those organizations. So if you searched, for example, Clark Square, you'd find the Clark Square Neighborhood Initiative, and I'm sure that the executive director would be more than happy to connect you with various opportunities, such as cleanups, such as bloom and groom activities, or getting involved with the business improvement districts to find out how you can support them. Or they might connect you with local businesses that you could support. I think that's often the biggest way people can support is with their money and with their wallet, because even if you don't have much collectively, it can make big statements if you all shop there. But if we all just collectively make small changes, that's what's going to make the biggest change.
Thank you so much, Brad, for sharing with us today and for all the work you do in our community. And that's a wrap for this episode with Brad Rutter, District 2 Community Organizer at Safe and Sound. Brad, thank you again for being here with us today.
Thank you, Andrea.
And remember, you can listen to our previous episodes by visiting milwaukeepbs.org/Adelante Pronto podcast, or find us in the different podcast platforms. You're listening to Adelante Pronto, a Milwaukee PBS podcast. I'm your host, Andrea. Gracias. Y hasta la próxima.